Welcome to the Point Cybersecurity Podcast. Each week, join Petko Stoyanov and Rachel Lyon to explore the latest in global cybersecurity news, trending topics, and industry transformation initiatives impacting governments, enterprises, and our way of life. Now, let's get to the point. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point Podcast. I'm Rachel Lyon, here with my co-host, Petko Stoyanov. Hi, Petko. How you doing?
Hey, doing well, Rachel. You know, it's kind of funny when you first started looking at who we're having here today. I started having memories of, because Ismael and I used to work together for years at McAfee, and then I started thinking about, well, how long I've been in the business, and I'm like, wait, BlackBerry, do they make phones? What are they doing now?
You are
wait,
hilarious.
What are they doing in threat research? And I've got to ask Ismael now, like, I know he's a hardcore researcher and, you know, SANS teacher and everything else. So we've got the man, the myth, the legend, Ismael here. And he does not need a last name.
You are hilarious. Yes. So for all of our other friends out there who aren't personal friends with Ismael, we've got Ismael Valenzuela, who's Vice President of Threat Research and Intelligence at BlackBerry, joining us today. We're going to have such a great conversation, you guys. Welcome, Ismael.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Petko. Yes, and it's always great to do these things, but when you do it with friends, even better, right? So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Exactly. Do we want to start at the beginning, Petko?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, Ismael, you've been in cyber before it was called cyber, right?
It was called something else at the time, right?
You're calling me old right now, but I know that you're about the same age as I am, so let's go with that. Yeah, we used to call this InfoSec, right? Information security, which still think it's a bit more appropriate than, cyber. But I think we lost that battle. It's just like the definition of a hacker. As much as we would like that to be defined differently, it is what it is. But yes, I think I started with my own company in the year 2000 in Malaga, Spain. Beautiful place, by the way, if you haven't been there. And yeah, it was like, something I liked. It was a passion that I had. I thought, hey, this is like the combination of things that I love to do. System administration with solving puzzles and getting my hands dirty on infrastructure, securing things, keeping an eye on attackers. So it sounded like fun, but we never thought it was going to be what it is today.
Now, you've been in the industry. I mean, you and I used to work together at McAfee, I believe, and now you're at BlackBerry. But that's not all you do, right? Aside from the podcast, you're always busy, I found. What else are you doing outside of BlackBerry?
I guess I'm doing too much. That's the problem. But like as I said before, when something is a passion, you end up covering a lot of different projects and initiatives. And I have this problem that I don't say no to things as often as I probably should, right? But yeah, I've been teaching for SANS for the last 12 years, I believe. Yeah, about 12 years. Wow. Started in Europe when I moved to the States in 2014. Kept doing that, and I'm an author of a class as well around zero trust, and working on some other projects that you may know about maybe in a few months. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of different things in the industry. I like to go to conferences, to speak, to do research, to present, and also I guess it's something I'm enjoying more these days, to build teams and manage, teams that where you can not only do cool things, but also learn from other people that are doing cool things and learn from each other, right?
That's the fun. I mean, you're on the fun front lines, I like to think, right? I mean, it's, seeing everything as it's happening and developing and almost kind of like the scary stuff behind the scenes. And it's, in your time, like, kind of, what's been your perspective on how things are changing? Are they becoming more diabolical, or, we're just hearing about it more? I'm always curious, kind of having been in the industry, I see it through a lens, but someone who's been on the front lines for as long as you have, I think you've got a little bit of a different perspective. It's about
the time of the year, right, where everybody makes those predictions, which I really hate. One of my colleagues in the team, he says, we don't talk about predictions, we talk about forecasting, because that's more scientific. Prediction is like, let me stick my finger up and see, what's going to happen next year. No, we do predictions. We look at the data, we see the trend, and then we do analysis on that, and we tell you what's probably going to happen. And the reality is that it's all about geopolitics. Right? If you look at threat intelligence is just the art of translating what's happening in the world of the geopolitics into how that will affect the cyber world. And I think obviously the trend is just going to continue. We're going to see a lot more collaboration between traditional cybercrime, financially motivated groups working with APTs, especially providing them with initial access to environments. A lot more info stealers, more credentials being sold in the dark web. We see that a lot, right? Yeah. These days, and something we've seen over the last year as well is a lot more focus on Linux platforms, even Mac OS. And interestingly, because we've always said that, the best bang for the best bang for the buck. Can I even speak?
Yes.
It's thank you. It's on Windows, right? So that's why attackers are focusing on Windows. What's happening today is that attackers are creating malware in languages like Golang, which can be executed on multiple platforms. So just with investing their time in once into creating this malware, now they can make it portable and also infect Mac OS Linux systems. And then maybe the other thing I would highlight that I think we're going to see more and more, it's another buzzword these days, supply chain attacks, right? But it's true. As companies are investing more in building defensible security architectures, we're getting better at having more visibility, better detection, better response capabilities. Supply chain is still very impactful, and it is an avenue that attackers are going to continue using.
And Ismael, when you say supply chain, can you tell us more about what you mean, like when it comes to infrastructures and software, and when you say supply chain for our audience?
Yeah, it's about abusing the trust chain, right? So, for example, I buy a security software and I trust that vendor because, hey, they're in the business of security, right? So I install this, I put it on my network, and I let this software connect to the internet and just do the updates or do whatever it has to do. And I then put additional controls over that, thinking that software could have something extra, because maybe it's not you that were attacked directly. It was that third party that was attacked. Their source code was modified, and now there is a backdoor in there that can be leveraged by an attacker to get access to your internal network. And in most cases, to your most trusted segment, right? Whether it's on-site or cloud-based. So it's very tricky because, if you think about large suites of software, okay, like we talked about SolarWinds, right? 2 years ago, but it could be anything. It could be any software that users install on their computers. Things like I'm just going to throw names there, right? I don't know if we're supposed to do that, but I don't know, Dropbox or WhatsApp, right, or any communications tool, Slack, or is this safe? Can we run this in our computers? So I think we're going to see a lot more emphasis on auditing, product security, testing and auditing the source code, and what do we put on our laptops, right? On our
definitely.
computers.
I think, did you guys read this? I mean, I know TikTok's always everyone's favorite thing to hate, but I believe it's been banned in government offices now, is something I was reading, which I always think is it that bad, Ismael? I mean, is TikTok really like that diabolical, like bad thing lurking? Because I'm obsessed with it right now, by the way. So
I'm going to answer that with the default answer to any of these questions, which is like, it depends, right? And every time I have these conversations, I always ask this question back, like, tell me more about your threat model. What's your threat model? Because what's acceptable for me as a user, right, or as a maybe small company, or my risk appetite might be very different from the DoD.
A little bit, yeah. A
large financial organization that is conducting business in a country where there is some geopolitical situation, right, where attackers might be interested in. So it all depends on your risk appetite But yeah, many organizations may start saying, look, this software, we didn't trust it. So with just the policy is we're not going to install it on corporate managed computers. Like on your personal device, you can do whatever you want, but that's going to be completely segregated off the network, and it's going to have, a separate connection. You do with that device whatever you want.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I know you mentioned software, but it also then applies, I think, to hardware, because I think saw the U.S. government also banning certain network infrastructure brands that they wanted to make sure, look, we would not want to do business with you if you had X.
Absolutely.
Without mentioning their names. So, we always talk about software, but that software's got to run on something. And sometimes, and we all know this, there's always software in your BIOS, in your firmware that, when it goes, now it's a lot more targeted. It's probably not as mainstream as some of the others, but it goes back to what you said, risk appetite. The risk appetite for a U.S. government or a nation state that is constantly under attack, they're going to worry about not just the software, they're going to worry about the chips and everything there.
And think about, I was going to say, think about, IoT devices, security cameras, all these things that we just bring into our home, and that we don't really know what's running on them. And large government agencies, they've been doing this for quite some time, right? At BlackBerry, we have a bunch of people that are focused on this product security testing. One of our big business units is IoT, even automotive. Software for cars, right? When you think about it, there's like about 250 million electric cars running our software, and think about what that can, how attackers could start shifting their attention to this in the future, and what the impact of that could be.
Can you tell us more about what BlackBerry is working on now? Because Rach and I were talking about this. She loves her BlackBerry from years ago, and I'm like, I think they're doing more than that now. And yet, you're in a lot of different things. You just mentioned the millions of cars out there. What's BlackBerry up to nowadays?
That's a good question. So essentially, we have two business units. One is cybersecurity. The other one is IoT, and they're obviously very related to each other. And as I said before, on the the cyber side, you probably are familiar with Silence. So that's the company that was acquired by BlackBerry years ago, and that we continue to work with. I run the threat research and intelligence team, which we are, as I said, Rachel before, at the forefront, trying to monitor what's happening in the world and creating threat models and sharing that information through many different ways. We do a lot of public talks. We do reports, blogs. Recently, the U.S. government has been acknowledging some of our research when we shared some of these TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures for specific threat actors. But we also build or improve our products as a result of that research. And the other piece, the IoT, automotive, is really fascinating because it's not the future, right? It's the present. As I said before, millions and millions of cars running this software, QNX and large manufacturers, that they use that to build the capabilities that you have when you get into your car and you get your phone connected, right? You get your access to a lot of different services. And this is just going to increase because at the end of the day, cars are becoming just like computers on wheels.
Yep.
And that's really interesting to me because it's where we're heading towards, and it's nice to be in a company where we're at the forefront of these two very fascinating fields as it is IoT and cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
And we still have BlackBerry software on our phones. Yeah, we don't do phones anymore, but we have BlackBerry software that you can run on iPhone, on Android, and actually we work with a lot of different governments to secure these communications, but it's not that well known.
Yeah, it's kind of you kind of remind me of I think I've seen some of your BlackBerry interfaces. I'm so used to Android owning the car business, but I'm finding out BlackBerry does have tons of it out there with BMW and some of the higher end ones. What are the major attacks that cars have that someone would want to run a more secure operating system in their car versus custom made, let's say, or rolling their own?
Well, that's a good question. I think that if you look at what's happening today, we don't see, outside of the research, right? We don't see these attacks happening in the real world. as of today, and most of the software that that you see today implemented in cars, the telemetry generated, is more about like sensors, right? Looking at what the car is doing and how to become more efficient. But as cars have a lot more features, and we're talking about the next few years, and you start talking about cars being able to pay for things automatically as you go. Then as there's always money, when there's money involved, right? Attackers, they always have an interest in that. And I think that's when we're going to see maybe attackers shifting their attention towards this. But as of today, thankfully, we don't see real world attacks against cars as something, prevalent.
So, but you are seeing, I believe BlackBerry's got a large threat intelligence infrastructure, and you guys are seeing attacks on companies, right? Is there something we should be doing in order to share more data and kind of get ahead of attackers or be aware of this happening? Any suggestions there?
Well, something we have been doing is collaborating with a lot of intelligence agencies around the world. I just mentioned before, like we talk regularly to DoD, DISA. We share information with them, and they gather this information and they share it right with the community, with companies, especially obviously anything related to critical infrastructure that affects everybody, all of us as citizens, residents. We're very prompt quick in sharing that information with them. So I think that's obviously one of the things that can help sharing with those agencies, so they can share more with the community. And I think that many security companies are doing a good job at that, at sharing that type of information. Obviously, when it comes to intelligence, not everybody shares everything, because there's also value behind that, and there's an industry, and there's money to be made out of this. But I think we have to be responsible and understand that, okay, there are things that we cannot withhold. We have to release this information quickly to those that can do more, right? That what we can, or let's say what we should do, right? Because we're not law enforcement. We can do research. We can find about the bad guys. We would love to punch the bad guys in the face, but we cannot do that, right? It's not on us to do that.
But I have seen, I think companies, do takedowns of some of these infrastructures if they're operating in certain areas, or working with DNS providers to disable, all the domain namespace. They're sharing the threat data with certain ecosystems that do threat sharing. I think my experience, a lot of the challenges, no one wants to be attributed as the original, patient zero of when they found it. It's because then someone's like, "Oh, did you get hacked?" I can't answer that, Yeah. But I think, to your point, the sharing is something we need to do more often, because if we can get faster at that, we can get faster at preventing the next attack and the third attack from them reusing that infrastructure, reusing that code base. And, you mentioned earlier the supply chain attacks that we saw. Those are very targeted. But if we know it's happening, think about how many companies we could have helped. Hey, look for this ahead of time before it goes out. It might be coming from SolarWinds. But I think, to your point, like, it is become a business, but I think the business is trying to automate the sharing into products and into everything. I'd love to get your take on what's like some of the craziest 0 days you've seen around this threat intelligence. You mentioned IoT and others, but what's some of the most interesting ones? I see you smiling, for those of you that are on the podcast, but he's got some, knowing Ishmael, he's always got something in his head he's thinking about that's,
I'm trying to think of something that would be like, funny, but the reality is that most of these things are not really that advanced, and that's the sad part, that it's always about credentials compromise. We've had on the news recently, big company, well known, that's it was like this attack where the user is bombarded with multi-factor authentication messages, right? And no, that was not the initial access. The initial access was an info stealer, something like Redline. We see a lot of those. Why? Because it's a big business. You don't have to be very sophisticated to just spray all of these attacks, phishing, watering hole attacks, just enticing somebody to download and execute something. We see lots of especially, with teenagers. I have teenagers too at home, and they download, games, cheat sheets, things like that, and they come with these info stealers. People install these things, you get the credentials stolen, and it might be that guy that is playing with that computer also works for the large multinational. Now you have username and password, right? And then those credentials are sold on the dark web for just like $10 or $5. Like really, it's crazy. And then that's when you see the multi-factor authentication attack coming after that. So the reality is that it's not as sophisticated as we maybe could think. Obviously, 0 days is always something. We've seen a lot of 0 days exploited, or unpatched, I should say, unpatched systems, VMware systems being exploited this year. And which brings another question, like why would people expose these servers to the internet? But once again, it's a lack of a solid defensible architecture, lack of good hygiene, the simple things really.
So if you were, let's say, like a small business enterprise, depending on what, not a nation state, not a Fortune 5,000, Fortune 10 company, but if you're a regular company out there that maybe has 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 employees, and you're trying to do right by your employees, you're trying to do what's needed, what are like top 2 or 3 things you would say they should do or be aware of to create a defensible architecture, or protect some of their from info stealers and other attacks, those initial vectors?
I think I'm a big fan, and I've mentioned this before, of having a threat model. When we think about business continuity, ransomware has changed everything, because now people understand, like, oh, if I'm a victim of ransomware, this impacts my business directly, right? But it's more than that. If you're a small company, who do you do business with? Because you're always part of a chain, right? Even if you're small. But do you work with financial organizations? Do you work with governments? Do you work with education, with healthcare? Mm-hmm. Now, how can your organization be abused or used, right? What can harm you? What are the your lines of revenue that brings most of the money into the company, the services, the products you have? And now how can that be impacted by any of these cyber attacks? And at least have that high-level threat model. And if you cannot do that, you don't have that information, like get somebody to do that for you. And then with that information, now you know what's at stake, what's at risk. How much money can I lose, right? Mm-hmm. How much will impact my business? And based on that, you can make decisions now on, okay, I want to go with this provider, use managed services, right? Small organizations, they're never going to have a SOC. They're never going to have a threat intelligence team, an incident response team in-house, because that's not their business. But at least know what's the strategy. The companies must own that. And I think that's changing a little bit right now, that companies are starting to understand that you cannot separate business from cybersecurity. You have to know what your threat model is. Do you do business in Taiwan? Well, what could happen if China invades Taiwan? Right. How is it affecting what you see today in the Southeast Asia? Because we see a lot of attacks in Southeast Asia right now, especially attacks related to stealing intellectual property, espionage. Those are the questions that we need to answer.
I was actually having a conversation. You're speaking almost of regulation, not just geopolitical, but almost a regulation. I was having a conversation recently with someone about what happened in Australia with Optus. If you've been following some of their, I don't know if I'll call it breach, but spills, whatever you want to refer to it as, now there looks to be a regulation impact where they're talking about how do we put the burden back on them for this breach. And then at the same time, which is almost like a checkmate move, is you saw the cyber insurance company market saying, we're no longer covering nation states attacks. So now you're like, well, before I'd say it's a nation state, but really it's someone just clicked the wrong button. And now you get into the burden of proof is to prove that you were not negligent. And so I think there's going to be a lot more investment in cybersecurity to say, did I do the right thing? Back to your threat models. If we're doing the right thing, that says we're not negligent. We're doing our due diligence here, but there is that possible risk. And I think as a cybersecurity professional, you hit the you hit it really concisely. You've got to be tied to the business. And it's not just the company, but also be aware of the impacts in Southeast Asia or regulatory changes that might happen. As part of that threat model needs to consider, if this changes, we can't just fix everything with cyber insurance. We might have to actually invest in certain things to avoid the risk to the business.
That's a problem we've always had with security, right? Like every now and then somebody comes up with, I have the solution to all of our problems. And whether it is, I don't know, you call it however you want, like XDR is right now, right? XDR, that's a solution to all the problems. Or cyber insurance, I have insurance, therefore I am covered. And no, there's a lot more. There's regulations are great, compliance is great, but that's only the starting point. And you always have to look beyond that. And if you cannot do these things yourself, as I said before, well, go to somebody that can help you at least cover the basics. Nobody can be 100% protected. Nobody can protect even everything, all the assets. That's why you have to be specific and know what's important to your business. And if you don't know the answer to that question, you have another problem.
Yeah, you don't know your business, so you can't protect it.
Exactly.
It's an interesting thing. We've talked about trends. We talked about your background. I feel like, we can talk about so many different things here. Rachel, anything we're missing?
My favorite topic, Ismael, is this whole, we talk about, kind of the geopolitical landscape with cyber. And, when you started hearing these terms like cyber war, when, the whole Ukraine and Russia, I know Pecco's laughing because my question is, does a cyber war ever end? I mean, are we ostensibly now in this perpetual cyber war, and you've got these volunteer cyber armies that you really can't regulate, people are just kind of jumping in the fray and who knows what can happen. How do you even get a handle on something like that? And does it ever end? And how would you know?
Well, I think it has to go to what I said before. What is that you should really be worried about? And it's funny because we're talking about cyber war here, but if you ask the people in Ukraine right now, they don't care about cyber war. They care about, bombs like dropping their houses and killing their loved ones. So
definitely.
That puts things into perspective, right? It's like we thought that, cyber war always has an important part and it took an important part, especially leading into the invasion. But then at that point, it's all about the physical war, right?
Right.
So it's about risk management. We know all those risks are out there. It's like, getting to your car in the morning, like, there's so many risks, but you don't stay home because you know that you have to do things. Right. But you're constantly managing or evaluating what are the acceptable risks and which are the ones that you're not going to take today, right?
Right.
Same thing with cybersecurity. We have to live, we have to operate, we have to do business. And there's so many threats out there, but not all APTs, they're not going to go after everybody, right? They go after specific organizations that have specific things. What are the things I have to worry about? Well, ransomware attacks, that obviously can affect everybody. Credential stealers. And I'm a big fan of emulating these things. Hire somebody to do that emulation for you. If I was a victim of this type of attack, what will happen? What data will you be able to access? And that puts things into perspective and gives you factual data that you can use now to make decisions.
It's interesting. I had this, I've noticed recently, it's most of the time, I think I saw a statistic where 80% of the attacks, you don't find out about them from internally, you find out because someone notified you. And sometimes you get notified by, let's say, the FBI, who will tell you, hey, we see some of your IP traffic coming to this domain that we took down. And the question is, do you guys own this IP? Are you aware of it? Do you know what's there? It's part of the conversation. And when you start going through that, you realize, we need an instant response. We have to figure out how to respond to the FBI. We need now, potentially the media has to get involved. So there's I think from the threat modeling, if you take that one step further, is you almost have to do a tabletop. What if this happened? What if the ransomware happened? Who do we bring in internally? Do we have canned responses? what's the process we can quickly make a decision in not days, but hours or minutes? And then how do we interface externally? Do we have the relationships externally?
Yep. And you can do this with tools that are available out there, even data that is available out there. I'm a big fan of the MITRE ATT&CK framework to build these threat models. You can go into Attack Navigator and say, okay, if I'm in healthcare, what are the attack groups, or even I call them weapons, the weapons or the software that can be used against me? And, you can start with things that we already know that people is using. You can just read the reports. I said Redline before as one of the top info stealers we're seeing. You can look at, Cobalt Strike, Silent Trinity, other frameworks that attackers are using. So if they're using these weapons, what do they look like when they're used on an endpoint, on a network? What type of artifacts will it generate? Do I have visibility of that? Am I able to detect this? And if so, how fast can I detect and react to something like this? So that puts now the threat model into something practical that you can measure, that you can improve.
Ismael, I got a silly question here. Who gets to pick these names? Like Redline and, some of these, it almost feels like astrology where whoever finds it gets to kind of name it in the sky, and then afterwards I'm like, is it the same one that is the same thing I'm seeing in the sky, the same thing as what you're seeing? And we both call it two different things. It feels like some of these names always feel like astrology. We're talking about the same thing, but we're speaking different languages. And I'm kind of curious, how do they get named?
That's interesting. I guess some of that is marketing, right? Even the bad guys have marketing. Or you create your own team. I mean, your own tool. I remember back into 2014, 15, I created this tool called Rastreador, which was a little tool that I used to, before EDRs, right? To go and collect artifacts from different systems and then bring them into one single machine and do analysis on that. Long story short, I called it Rastreador because I thought that was cool, and it's based on Spanish hunter. But I then realized that nobody here in America could pronounce that correctly. So that was a marketing failure. I just want to figure out how to spell it first. Right? So that was a marketing failure from my side. But I already had stickers and a logo, so I was not going to change it. And and then I went to Black Hat and I was able to present it there. So that was cool. But for example, we have now the ability to call malware names. And if you read one of the latest reports we analyze some malware. We look at the PDB, which is a database where you can see debugging symbols for a binary. And we look at that and we saw some strings that said ARC, and it was a crypter, right? So we said, okay, ARC, ARC crypter. So that was the name. So we get to name the baby and say, this ransomware is called ARC crypter. But again, that's just a name to describe something. So it's part of the fun.
Point.
You find it, you name it. Is
exactly
really what the mantra is. Okay, I love this. One day I'll find something, I hope. I would love to have that opportunity.
It's part of the fun, yeah.
Absolutely. So I want to know, Ismael, I like to get into kind of the more, friendly parts of life in cybersecurity. And Pecco probably knows where I'm going with this. I'm curious, what are you reading right now? I'm in a total pivot. What are you reading right now? And it doesn't have to be security related. I will say we did have a guest who was reading Dave Grohl's biography, and I went out and bought it. I was so excited about that. So it can be anything that you find interesting, but it's, I think it's, is there a downtime reading that you like, in addition to work stuff, or, what's on the bookshelf right now?
I have to say, right now, because end of the year, it's so crazy and I have, so many presentations and so many things. I'm not reading a new book right now, but as soon as, we get into 2-3 weeks and I get some downtime, I'm going to pick up something new. But I can tell you that I love to read about history. I love to read about things that don't have to do necessarily with cybersecurity, because I found that helps me to become better at my work. And when I do presentations as well, it enriches
Yes.
your, and it's also good to keep your sanity, right? So for example, I live, not too far from New York, and there's everything in New York City, right? But there's like a couple of art fairs that they do there that I love to go, which is like local artists and people that are not very well known, and just go there with my family, just walk around the booths and watch people do amazing things. Like, how do you do that? That's awesome, right? Or talking to a photographer, like explaining what they felt when they took that photography and how they did it. And I find that so fascinating, and it helps me to keep my sanity. So anything that doesn't have to do necessarily with cyber. I remember going on a flight recently. I've been flying a lot recently, but one of these where it's like, I don't want to watch a movie. I just want to, I didn't feel like reading. But they had these master classes. And it was one with Malcolm Gladwell, right? And he was explaining about how to tell a story and how to tell stories that are captivating. And so I got a couple of ideas that's like, whoa, I'm going to use that in my next talk. And it turned out that people loved it. And it was something completely different from what I've done so far.
Right.
So my suggestion is, to any cybersecurity professional listening to this, just do other things.
I love it. I love it.
Don't just live for cyber 24 hours. It's not good. It's not good to anybody. It's not good for you. And it's not good for the people around you. So pick on other interests.
I love that way you were talking about storytelling too, because we have talked about that in the past, because so many people, especially if you're talking to a CEO or, kind of the board level folks who really just don't know. And it's that storytelling that kind of helps them understand what the heck you're talking about and what the impact is and why it matters. And there's an art to that. There really is.
I always use this quote from, I have the book here, Clifford Stoll, right? The Cuckoo's Egg. And he did a presentation a few years ago at a SANS CTI summit. And he was explaining how, when Berkeley Labs got hacked in 1986, and he went to FBI and trying to explain that, hey, I have a hacker on my network, and the FBI officer was like, how much money was stolen? And he said, well, 75 cents. The guy was like, whoa, okay, kid, come back when you have something. So he said, I have all the data, and I thought people would understand what the data meant. And he said, no, you have to tell the story. That's what people really understand. So yeah, it's important to be able to tell stories that explain the so what. Why do you have to pay attention to this, or why do you have to do something about it?
I love that.
I love that. And we've learned so much about you and what BlackBerry's up to now, and ultimately for folks who are in cyber, we got to make sure keep our minds sometimes out of cyber to do well in cyber. It's important, yeah. There's so many beautiful things around us, nature, music, other things that can help you become a better person, a better professional at the end of the day too.
Exactly. And it doesn't look like we're ever going to unplug anytime soon and get back to the world of unconnectedness. So good to be, good to have these conversations, because I think to your point earlier, Ismael, you look at connected cars and electric vehicles, and we're connecting our homes. I mean, pretty soon, everything's so connected that, if you're not putting cyber kind of at the forefront of your thinking, it's just going to run amok and be complete chaos.
We're human beings,
right?
And we're made out of different needs, and obviously, like finding new stuff, learning, it's fascinating. But we also have to maintain our own health and mental health and physical health, and that involves other things. Cannot be just all cyber or work. Exactly.
I love that. I think it's a good message too. I think about probably kids at your age, teenagers that you have, and Pekka's children, and growing up with all of this information and all of this technology at your fingertips. And it's I came into it. I'm really old, but closer to like college age or what have you, and you see kind of the impact that it can have on kind of mental health, well-being, and but also getting sucked into like TikTok for an entire day, and kind of how does that kind of grow or change as you get older, or the next generation's coming behind us as well. So I love those kind of messages, because it's you got to remind yourself to get out and actually be in the moment.
It's a challenge. And I have to say, I've gone through all those phases of like, have a smartwatch, read all these ebooks. And maybe I'm going to sound boring now or old, but I don't use a smartwatch anymore. Like I just ditched that, and I'm using just a regular. I like watches, so a nice watch that it's not beeping or vibrating or sending me any notifications. I make sure that I turn off all the notifications as much as I can. Wake up in the morning and I get my coffee first, and I do the things. A little bit of reading, and before I even turn the phone on.
Wow.
And I'm not always good at that. I have to say, we're not perfect, right? Like sometimes it's just like first thing in the morning, I check my email and it's like, I shouldn't have done that.
Yes.
But all these little things help. Like even grabbing a book, like a physical book, when I need to do a deep study, absorb that information, I need to walk away from the computer. I cannot read on an electronic device because I get distracted.
Exactly.
Because all these applications are made for that, right? To keep you swiping and scrolling down.
Exactly.
You remind me of that whole industry of like self-improvement and folks who just want to get better. And yet at the same time, I start thinking about how you mentioned you got into cybersecurity because you got to, problem solve. So I'm thinking if there's anyone out there who's into self-improvement or any of that, get into cyber, because we need more of you because you're already a problem solver.
Right.
And we need more problem solvers. I mean, I think on one of our episodes, we had someone that did medieval history, and he did cybersecurity. He majored in medieval history, and now he's in cybersecurity. And think about it, he's an outsider, but he loved problem solving. And that's the mindset we need. Cyber is not a career, it's a mindset that we need to kind of proliferate and bring more people into the roles, because we definitely need more people.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about this field, that you get to work with people with different backgrounds, different ways of approaching things. I've never had so much fun than when I worked with people that didn't have my background. People that came from the data science, people came from big data PhDs, and they had no training on cyber security whatsoever. And I would be like talking to them, it's like, yeah, because this is like that. Oh, really? And why is that it's not like that? And it's like, well, it's obvious, but now I have to think about how to explain why it's obvious, and maybe it's not that obvious anymore. And that's really, again, enriching, right? You want to, when you're young, you want to start into a new field. You can spend a lot of hours, right? A lot of time going deep into something. But at some point, it's good for you to get out of that and then see what's around it. Zooming in and zooming out.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think of, to your point, when you have outside interest in like the medieval history person, he would look at security differently, right? Through kind of like the historical lens of war and combatants. And, and I just love to champion to all of our listeners out there, even if you have an art degree, like this is an amazing field and your perspective would be very valuable. And, I love that we continue to try to get that message out there, because we need so many more good people to come join us and join you in the trenches, Ismael.
Absolutely.
With all the fun. So, well, I know we're coming up on time. So I absolutely want to thank you for your time, Ismael. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm so excited about the work that you're doing at BlackBerry, particularly information sharing. It's critical if we're ever going to get ahead of these things or have a chance at trying to slow them down. So keep up the great work, and I look forward to following more about all the great work that you're doing at BlackBerry. And Petco, another great conversation. I love what we do. I love this podcast.
Thank you, Rachel.
So much fun. Thanks, Ismael. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, guys. So to all of our listeners out there, thanks again for joining us. Another great conversation. And don't forget to smash that subscription button. You get a fresh, clean episode in your inbox every Tuesday. So until next time, everybody, be safe.
Thanks for joining us for the To The Point Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Forcepoint. For more information and show notes from today's episode, please visit forcepoint.com/gov-podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, or Stitcher.